Well, welcome to our Jazzability podcast. And I'm Bob Mover. And today we're really honored. I'm really honored and happy to have, I think, one of the greatest living musicians with us, Mr. Eddie Daniels. And I'll tell you, just before we start, the way I got to hear Eddie Daniels for the first time was a revelation. I was at Phil Woods' jazz camp, which was called Rambler in 1967 when I was 15 years old. And Roger Rosenberg and I were both there, and a few other guys. Mike Brecker had been there. He came to visit that year. But one of the records that one of the cats had there was Eddie's record called First Prize. And, you know, I had been listening to Stan Getz. I mean, of course, Bird and Lester Young and you know, Stan Getz. And Sonny Rollins was new to me, too, at that time. I just kind of discovered that. And you know, here was this record called First Prize, and the cat just blew me away. I said, and I found out he wasn't that much older than we were. I mean, he was 10 years, a decade older. He was like 20, 23. How old were you when you made that record, Eddie?
25.
25, and I was 15. So it was like, I said, okay, when I'm 25, that's where I got to get to. You know, it was like a total, which I didn't quite, but the thing was that it was an incentive to hear somebody playing like that with that maturity and the whole, and putting together influences I thought that were interesting, you know, like disparate influences. I heard Getz, I heard Sonny Rollins, I heard, you know, that he knew his Bird, that he had all that together. So that was my first introduction to Eddie. And we're going to hear something from that in a little while, but we're going to talk a little bit first. Um, anyway, I just wanted to say that's how and then, you know, through the years, we got to know each other a little bit and stuff. And let me start out, you know, Eddie is one of the great clarinetists. I mean, especially among his gifts is to kind of revive the clarinet, which kind of got neglected.
I think it's breathing heavily in the back room. I can hear it.
It does that.
It's panting.
It's panting. It says here.
It's still saying, I'm not totally revived. Revive me more. Revive.
Right.
In fact, five.
Yeah, right. Wants to be revived. Well, when you came up, let's just begin with the beginning. Now you grew up in New York City. Were you from Brooklyn? Is that where?
Brighton Beach.
Brighton Beach. Oh, Brighton Beach. Yes.
This is Stahl's Knishes.
Ah, yes. Now speaking of knishes, we both were brought up in, you know, Jewish families, and you know, I think it's interesting clarinet because you always think in Jewish homes, the musical encouragement was there was piano, there was clarinet, and violin. Those were kind of the three instruments that you know, Jewish mothers encouraged their children to play.
Uh-huh.
So, did you grow up in a particularly religious home, like let's say religious and musical?
Not really, actually, not particularly religious, except I had to be bar mitzvahed. That was the religion du jour, and that's what my parents wanted. And my father had played the saxophone before he met my mother and had studied alto with Rudy Wiedoeft.
Oh, wow.
Who was, that doesn't mean my father could play because he never played for me, so I never got a chance to hear it. And the horn that I inherited from him was so funky that I can't believe that any virtuosity would have happened on it. It kind of grew mold in the closet, and it had like a purple lining on one of these old cases. When you open it, it has a wafting flavor of oldness.
I remember that I had a Holton. My first one was a Holton I got in a pawn shop for $35, and it was silver turning green. It had that patina to it. And when Ira Sullivan saw it and Stan Getz saw it, I met them both when I was young, and they took great pity on me. It's like, how can you learn on this? You know? So, but so that was your dad's one. So you started out on alto.
Yeah.
And then did you play piano first?
No, I met Herbie Mickman and I started playing the piano. You knew Herbie, right?
No.
You didn't know, or Howie Danziger? You didn't know either of those guys?
I know the name Howie Danziger.
Well, Herbie went to Midwood High School, and my clarinet teacher, Ray Musiker, at the time was one of the music teachers at Midwood High School. And he hooked me and Herbie up because Herbie was a jazzoid kid at, 14 and 13, 14, 15 years old, totally into it, so much more than I was. And he became a big influence coming over the house and playing the bass and the piano. And yeah.
What happened to him? Did he had a career?
He moved to LA from Brooklyn and ended up, he played with Sarah Vaughan. He's on a couple of videos with Bob James and Sarah Vaughan accompanying Sarah. And
his main instrument was bass, or
bass, more with bass, but he would teach piano, he would teach harmony. He'd have a lot of students come over. Yeah.
So he showed you changes. He was the guy that kind of showed you.
That's right. He got me to start to think about it. And then one summer we went away to the mountains in Vermont, New Hampshire. We went to New Hampshire to a hotel in New Hampshire, and then we were jamming all day long, just young kids. Not like today. What are the kids doing today? They wish they had something to jam on, Well,
that's a situation, I think for some reason, somehow music education might have worked in reverse in some ways, that we didn't really have schools to go to. And even if you
That's
went
right.
to school, they didn't want you playing jazz.
And no jazz programs. That's exactly right. Exactly right. Yeah.
So you had to seek out people and meet them. People say, what did you do? You just walked up to these great players and said, I want to know something. I said, basically, yeah, that's what you did. But how did you, so, did you experience some of that, with talking to very advanced players and stuff when you were very young, and getting next to people to pull your coat to things and that
Yeah,
kind of...
I wouldn't say they were very advanced, but for my age, for kids in high school, 15 to 16 years old, Herbie was listening to Stan Getz and Bird, and he told me my first Coltrane record, one of the very first ones on an early label, Transition was the name of the label. And it was a yellow cover, and Coltrane was on it. And Herbie said, you got to hear this guy, This is before anybody knew what Coltrane was, and it was always opening my eyes and getting me to have a thirst for understanding that music.
Yeah, I understand that. You meet people that that change you that way, that get you.
That's why teaching is so important. What we're going through in this country about teaching, about not having kids read books, what are you going to learn? You're creating a society that's going to, kind of half in the dark if you do that.
Absolutely. I don't know, it's such an ancient, a regressive concept of thinking that I just can't believe that we live in a society that's even talking about that.
I know.
What are we doing even mentioning that? Well, the whole literacy thing. And then, with, even with the education, the jazz education, everybody knows who the current cats are. And there's a tendency to feel, until we sound like two alta cockers, but, that if it didn't happen in their lifetime, it didn't happen. Basically, it wasn't important if it's not part of their world. So, if you ask people, everybody knows who Chris Potter is and who some of the cats that are out there, Ravi Coltrane. But if you say, do you know Don Byas? Very few people would know who. I used to do that in master classes. I would just say, give me an idea, how many of you have really listened to, Brad Meldau or somebody like that. And then I say, how many of you know Hank Jones? And one or two hands would go up. And it was like, there's a kind of there's a certain academic inbreeding that goes on in a way, that people go to school and then they teach the school, and that's their entire experience.
Right.
And so, the influences don't get passed down. But I was going to say, you were in a youth band. Let me get to that. I think that seemed to be the first mark of your career, in a way that, where you actually were in this Newport youth band, which was kind of an all-star band. Was that Marshall Brown's band?
Yeah, that was Marshall Brown.
Yeah, and there were cats in there like Ronnie Cuber.
Yes,
and a guy named Andy Marsala, right? Who was
right, right.
very. So was that your first time like in a real band with people? Can you tell me a little
Yeah,
bit about that?
absolutely. Absolutely. And we used to rehearse, I think it was called the Professional Children's School. It was up near where Lincoln Center is now, but further west, it was an old funky building. And we used to meet there once a week and play through charts, arrangements, and have fun with Marshall Brown. So it's really like, I mean, I think the essence of what we're saying is it's all about your influences.
Yeah, I mean that the personal influences and the influences that you're listening to.
It could even be your dog. Your dog could be a good influence on your playing.
She has a very good way of inhabiting a note. You know, that's what Red Mitchell told me once. We were talking about influences, and Red said that Sarah Vaughan was his biggest influence in a lot of ways. And I said, really, that's interesting. You know, that besides you didn't mention a bass player, you said Sarah Vaughan, and I said, well, I love her too, but what is it that could you describe? He says, what she does, the way she inhabits the note. That just when you think the note isn't going to get any prettier or isn't going to get any rounder or more centered,
right.
She has a way of somehow putting some extra patina on that note.
Exactly. Yeah.
And, you know, I think learning to do that, like we also, I mean, I was the kind of the tail end of the generation that could go out live and you could hear people like Zoot and, you know, and Al Cohn and Bud Johnson and Roy Eldridge and, you know, besides Coltrane and those people. I mean, tell me a little bit about your early listening experience. Like when you were 17, 18, you know, that was like 58, 59, something like that. And that may be the peak of a lot of things in music.
Well, actually, before that, you know, Benny Goodman, listening to Benny Goodman and Artie Shaw when I was 12 and 13. And then Herbie introduced me to Stan Getz and Miles and, you know, just changed my whole idea of anything. You know, I didn't know if I would even play jazz. I just started listening to these new sounds, and having a friend who really knew the music was great. Even before Coltrane, I was listening to Charlie Ventura.
I remember Charlie Ventura, sure. Jazz for the people. Bop for the people.
Yeah, yeah. Different kind of sound, different kind of swing, different kind of feel. But yeah.
So did you know, there was an article with Sonny Rollins in Downbeat years ago, and he mentioned a young tenor player that had sat in with him. And you were the mystery tenor player that Sonny mentioned.
Yeah.
So can you tell me about your, you know, I mean, what I found too, when I was young in my teens, the generosity of the older cats sometimes in letting you even get on the bandstand with them, with a Roy Eldridge or you know, or something wrong with these kind of people.
Well, Sonny was so I went to the Vanguard because I wanted to sit in with Sonny. I'd never met him, but I had been playing at the Vanguard with Thad's band. It was like our first couple of months or something, I think. So they knew me at the Vanguard. I could walk in and I say, hey, I want to talk to Sonny. You know, they say he's in that closet in back of the bandstand that was like smaller than the phone booth that Superman would change his clothes in.
Right.
And so, I mean, talking about generosity. So I knock on the door and he's come in, and Sonny is giving an interview to, it might be a guy named Joe Gordon. It was Downbeat magazine. And there's a flame, a candle with a flame that either Sonny is holding or is sitting on some kind of a stand. And I come in and Sonny is like, he's in the middle of an interview and this guy comes in from nowhere, me. A lot of chutzpah, too much taken for granted on my side. And yet he said, hi, who are you? What do you want? You want to sit? I said, I'd really love to sit in. He said, okay. And we talked a little, and I sat in right after that night. And when I think about that, and I think about how generous Sonny was to do that. I mean, if a stranger walked in, if you were in a phone booth changing into a Superman outfit, And some kid knocked on the phone and said, I want to sit in, with your Superman outfit, or I want to sit in. You say, get out of here, kid. When you're in the middle of something that's important to you, and here Sonny's being interviewed for Downbeat, and he's like, I'm just this jerky kid that just comes in selfishly wanting to play with him. And he said, sure. He had no negativity, it was very, very warm. And we became, I think we became good friends after that, and my wife and I would go up to his house and have dinner with him and his wife. And it was just so very open and sharing.
Yeah. I had a very nice relationship with Sonny for a long time. And I found that about him too. It's funny, I sat in with everybody. I had, no compunctions about asking anybody to play with them, except even as well as I knew Sonny, we would practice on the telephone together. I never asked him to sit in. It was like, I don't know why I did that, but I mean, everybody else, I did, but I mean, we practiced together. He came over and we did that, but so I really respect you and commend you. So you were a little older than I thought. What you said,
yeah.
You were already with Thad and Mel's band.
Yeah.
Which I used to hear you. That was after I went to Phil's camp, I moved to New York when I was 16. And my dad had been a big band trumpet player with Charlie Spivak, Tommy Dorsey, had his own big band in Boston and that kind of thing. So this was 1968. And, that was, the band was every Monday night started. That's when the Monday nights were going. So we never missed a Monday night. That was the one thing my dad and I did together. And we went, so I heard you a lot, which was great. In that time, sometimes with the other tenor player was Joe Farrell. Selden Powell was the other tenor player.
Joe Henderson was the other tenor.
And
Billy Harper.
Yeah. So that was, what was, how did you feel about playing in that band and also hearing Thad every week too? I mean, what a player he was.
It was an honor to be in that band. Because I was the youngest, I wanted to be playing all the time. I wanted to play solos, and being the youngest in a band that had all-star, beautiful, wonderful, historic players in it, I had to be very patient and wait for my turn, because I still felt that jazz was the improvising part. Even though I love being in a big band, I love the ensemble of the great writing that Thad did for saxophone, with Jerome being the lead alto, Jerry Dodge and Joe Farrell, Pepper Adams, and myself. Very good sax section where it's just not guys just blowing air through horns, but we're listening to the person next to us so that we could come and be this unit of a sound of a sax section, and I think that was a great experience for me, although a lot of times I was frustrated because I wanted to play more. But waiting around for my turn was important, and being polite and waiting while I listened to all the other great players playing was a wonderful experience, just a great experience.
Yeah, that was a phenomenal band and a phenomenal saxophone section. That was like, there's something about hearing something live too, just being able to hear that kind of thing live, and Bob Brookmeyer was a very strong part of that band. And, I used to go take my lessons with Richie Kamuka. For a while, I studied with Richie. And he'd bring me to the Merv Griffin show, and we'd take our lessons in the dressing room of the Merv Griffin show. So while I was studying with Richie, Jim Hall would drop by. I remember Jim would be sitting watching our lesson for a while. Or, all these great players would be there, Bill Watrous, Saul Schlinger, some of these cats would be observing us, and
well, that's influences and the chutzpah to sit in, like you said, you had that. You'd sit in with anybody during that period, And we talked about Sonny and the band. The band was a special band. There's no doubt about it. For me, it was unequaled in any band that I've ever played in, for the writing and the camaraderie and the feeling of the guys playing in a band like this. They're so happy. Everybody was so happy to be there.
There was that feeling, and there was a Jim and
As,
Andy
a,
going and all that. I mean,
as opposed to me going to Germany and playing with one of the German radio bands, where the guys, because they have a steady job every day or a certain amount of days a week, where they're playing jazz all the time and have new jazz stars coming in, they're very blasé about it. But meanwhile, all of us New York guys, and some of us, Mel and Thad and Mel, they played the Kraft Music Theater TV show, Kraft, they were all on TV shows doing big bands like Ed Sullivan, Thad played in the Ed Sullivan orchestra. But then when Monday came around and everybody got a chance to, like, we're all meeting at the Vanguard and we're going to play. And Thad brings in a new chart, and it started building, and the energy and the just everybody just being so happy about being there.
yeah, well, that's a very important point. I think the idea of that was the New York way too. The thing I was going to mention was with his lessons with Richie was Brookmeyer would be there, and he'd watch our lessons sometimes, and he intimidated me because he just had an intimidating. So at some point, I just wanted to ask you some things about him, because I never got to know him, except I would watch him at Jim and Andy's, hanging out, and the Spotlight Bar, and all of those things. But the thing is, Hal Galper and I were talking about this too, that there was a concept of having fun, and the music, being fun, and that's part of what made New York and the musicians that came out of New York, I think, a little different than everywhere. When I was in France once, Walter Davis Jr. and I would play, and we would actually physically laugh sometimes on the bandstand. Like, we'd get into throwing Chopin quotes back and forth to each other. One time I quoted "I Cover the Waterfront," and then later Walter did, and he said, "Hey, we both cover the waterfront." And, and these French people said, the French musicians play, and they come here and they're very serious, and they're good musicians. And you guys play like you don't even care about it. And you play all this stuff that's obviously you do care, but there was a feeling, I think you sensed with that band, all the fun. And I think that's what school has taken out of the music, to get back to that original point.
Right.
I went to
I think, all of them were doing these TV shows and recordings. It was a busy time, I think, for Mel and Richard Davis and Thad and a lot of guys in the band. They were all recording people, doing the recording scene in New York, which meant being on a record with a big band or a commercial, a Burger King commercial. They were all happy to get their Burger King commercial gig if it came, because it paid well, all of that stuff. And then Monday nights was escape time. He escaped the doing the regular gigs that they were all very happy to get, but then Monday night was we're home, we are home. And Thad would count off a tempo like that. You don't even need to know the tune. I could just hear him smiling and laughing, and before you know it, the whole band is just romping in that kind of a groove. And happy, and the audience is feeling it. We were all feeling it.
Well, there was a lot of happiness. I don't know, the world wasn't necessarily ever a happy place, perhaps. We could talk about that. But, there was a feeling of happiness in the music everywhere you went. You go to the Half Note and see Zoot Sims and Al Cohn, or Roy Eldridge and Anita O'Day. There would be things like that, and just the happiness that was exuded, that was happening. And I thought sometimes that everybody is happy, not necessarily do now, but the escape thing from the restrictions of these commercial gigs, which were, like you did that quite a bit. George Young used to take me around, our friend George. Yeah. I met him when I was 16, and he took me to studio dates and to Pearly Victorious, the show he was playing on Broadway, and to see, because he said maybe I should encourage doubling and being, and being a studio musician like he was, and, fantastic musician. And I tried to play a little clarinet and flute, and it didn't. I had alto saxophone on my mind. That was all I wanted to play.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And I would say, well, Heifetz doesn't play cello, but then you were one of those guys that defied that, because you could play saxophone and clarinet, you could play commercial music, and it didn't necessarily affect your jazz playing. Because I was always thinking, like if you start to play jingles and you do that stuff, then maybe you'll lose that special gift that makes.
Yeah, but then once in a while you get called for what you don't know what it is. You get a call, show up in this studio at 2:00 on a Wednesday, bring your tenor. I show up and it ends up being a Sister Sledge record. And I ended up playing a solo, Gotta Love Somebody, that was on one of their hit records. And I got to put my foot into the commercial world while still being myself, because if you listen to the solo on that record, Gotta Love Somebody, it's kind of a funky but more jazz oriented kind of solo. And so all of us never knew, when you open that door to go into a studio, they don't say, get ready for this solo, you're going to have a solo on this record with these artists. You don't know. And so you walk in and you're the only one. And I say, okay, well, it's a Billy Joel album. I want you to put a solo on. I did something on the Nylon Curtain, a Billy Joel thing, that I think I got called that night. Phil Ramone called me at home and said, want to come put a solo on a record? I said, oh, yeah, So it's kind of it was a good thing, because I think most of us never knew what was going to happen. And when you don't know, you walk around with a kind of open attitude that whatever comes, I can handle, I can do it, I will have fun with it. If it is a Burger King commercial, I'll love it, because I'll get a good residual payment on that. But who knows? Phil Ramone calls me at home. Holy cow, Phil Ramone, one of the famous recording engineers and geniuses of all time. He recorded a lot of great records.
You know the story about Phil Woods meeting Billy Joel?
No.
Classic story. It's beautiful. Phil had, I think, one of the great sense of humors of anybody. So he's playing some concert in like a school, because after the Billy Joel records, Phil started to play high schools all over the place. He was telling me he was doing that. He'd get booked, his band would get booked in high schools. And somebody says, Billy Joel is playing a concert in the neighborhood tonight, and he wanted to come by and meet you, because they'd never actually met. Phil came in and did the recording.
Oh, you mean this is even after he did the solo on the record?
It's after he did the solo record. They still hadn't met.
Oh, God.
So somebody said, Billy Joel is playing, and he wanted to know if he could come and see you, visit, just say hello and meet. So Phil goes, sure, it'd be nice to meet him. So Billy walks in and says, Phil Woods, and Phil says to Billy, I got one thing to say to you, man. I made you, I can break you.
That's funny. That is funny. But Billy Joel should have had like a check for 20 grand in his pocket and handed it to Phil for what he did.
That's true.
Phil, like myself, again, a studio guy going around, he told, come put a solo on this Billy Joel record. He probably didn't know Billy Joel particularly well, but we'd go in and get scale or double scale, which would be a couple of $100. And then you're ending up on a record that becomes like a Billy Joel, just the way you are, with that great solo of Phil's. And Phil, got scale or double scale, but, Billy Joel was, it's like the girl from Ipanema would stand, thinking about,
Right, but Stan actually, was a very shrewd, business person, and I think got himself. There was production. He was the leader on the record, and I'm sure Stan got himself.
And Astrud made Bupkis on that record. Girl from Ipanema.
Yeah, who we talking? We're talking about
Stan Getz, a girl from Ipanema.
No, I understand that, but who made Bupkis?
Astrud.
Oh, Astrud, yes.
Because she just passed away a week or two ago, and a lot of the story came out how she just went there and just did that, and didn't really get appreciated for it by Stan or by the company. She just got paid, and that was it. And like Phil putting that great solo on that.
That's the same thing. Yeah, there are some. Yeah, that's I see. Astrud, yes, did that.
So the good part was you go into a studio and you don't know what's going to happen, which gives you a certain kind of freedom, because you're good enough to play almost anything and throw it at me. I love having, as one of those guys, I loved having stuff thrown at me and not knowing what it was, and being able to wade through it in the context of Sister Sledge or Nylon Curtain, Billy Joel, or whatever, whoever it was, Michel Legrand record, or, you have to immediately click into what is needed on the record. I think that's the thing that we all of us at the Vanguard, getting back to the guys in Thad's band, they were all guys going around in studios who were the top guys that would be called to put a solo on a record or be in an ensemble on a commercial or something like that.
Well, to give people an idea, that Jim and Andy's, which was the famous restaurant saloon run by Jim Kazanak, I forget, he had a Greek last name, and Andy was his cat. And you would find everybody hanging out there. They even had a special phone number that if you could call there, and you would hear Jim say, "Somebody needs a trombone player for a jingle."
Like the union floor.
It was like the union floor on Wednesday. It was like people. So that's how busy, everybody was. And the Zoot Sims Dottie Dodgen story is funny about about the amphetamine. Yeah, Zoot is playing a gig with Dottie Dodgen, and Dottie, who was a wonderful female drummer and the wife of Jerry Dodgen at that time, for those of you who may not know this. So Dottie says, "Oh, Zoot, I'm so tired, man. I know that first set. I know I was doing my best. I was dragging a little bit, but I got up at 7:00 and I had a jingle, and then at 2:00 in the afternoon I did a film score. I mean, I played on a film, orchestra, and then I did this, and this is my 4th gig today. I'm barely making it. I probably should have not taken it, but I wanted to play with you, Zoot, and I'd love to do it." Well, Zoot says, "Well, perhaps, maybe I can help you with this." And Zoot gives her biphetamine or amphetamine, little dexedrine tablet, and he gives it to her. He says, take this. This will probably help you with that. So afterwards, they're playing the next set, and Dottie says, "Yeah, dude, you're right. That he said he took what I gave you." She said, "Yeah, I feel much better. I took half of it." He said, "Oh, you took half of it. Well, what'd you do with the other half?" She said, I threw it away." The dude says, "Dottie, don't you know? Don't you realize there are people in Europe right now who are sleeping?"
It's a great line. It's a great line. Most people wouldn't know that, having Jewish parents, where our parents, my mother would say that, "Eat your food. Don't you know there are people in Europe who are starving?" That's the line, right?
That's right. And that was Alan Sherman, who did Hello Mother, Hello Father. He had one song about fat people saving the world, because he thought that when they told him there were people starving, he thought the more he ate, the less they starved.
Oh, God.
So,
yeah.
But so you ended up, I'm not ended up, but now you were doing great in New York, and then you made a life change. You have been in New Mexico for a number of years. And how long have you been out in New Mexico?
Probably 25, 30 years.
Yeah,
at least 30 years.
May I ask what precipitated that? You're doing. It wasn't like
the lack of precipitation is what precipitated that. It's a dry place. I'm playing on words, because precipitation, you live in Santa Fe, it doesn't rain a lot. It's a dry place. So the lack of precipitation is what precipitated that. Yeah. And no, anyway, my wife and I spent a summer here and fell in love with it and said, "Okay, let's go there next summer again." And we did that. And then after that, I said, "We got to find a place. We should live here." And we kind of agreed to it, and we shopped around for a house. We found a house, which is not far from where I'm sitting now. It's a smaller house, 2-bedroom house on 5 acres, which seemed like a lot of space for a New Yorker. And we love it here. It's a great place.
Yeah, it looks beautiful, and it seems that when you moved there, that you did more jazz playing. You know, you there was a period in New York where you seem to be more in the studios. You know, there was occasionally you'd play a jazz gig and one could hear you there, but you
Well,
didn't. Yeah,
thanks to Dave Grusin and Larry Rosen, who had GRP Records, that they gave me a contract, and so that I would do 1 or 2 records a year. I think it was 1, but definitely 1 or 2 on some years. And so I didn't feel I needed to live in New York to do that. I could live anywhere. Recorded some of my albums in LA. I've recorded some parts of albums even here in Santa Fe in some studios. It's funny, I was listening to a record that I did some solos on, a Brazilian album that I just got the record to listen to. Mike Manieri's on it, and a lot of great players are on this record.
that's not the Egberto Gismonti. That's a different project, right?
Yeah, that's different. This is a purely Brazilian project. If you want, I'll just go run and get the album. It'll take, maybe it's not that important, but a lot of good players. None of them went to Brazil to record the album. It's a Brazilian album coming out in Brazil. Each one, Randy Brecker is on it. He plays some beautiful solos, Manieri, you know, a lot of really the great players that I grew up with. And what did they do? They went to their local recording studio, recorded the track, and sent it back to Brazil electronically, which is what I did. So there's a whole record. There's the new world of recording where a Brazilian record has all these Americans, famous jazz people on it, who don't have to go to Brazil to do the album. They go to their neighborhood studio.
Yeah, that's an amazing thing. I've been working on a string project and orchestra, and you know, Steve Kenyon has a whole, Roger Rosenberg and our friend Lawrence Feldman, and Steve will just go to Steve's house and do the reeds there, and then the brass will be done at somebody else's house.
Right.
The strings are done. You know, it's like instead of everybody trying to get a string orchestra and a full orchestra into a studio, you've got everybody, you know,
Right.
kind of doing that. I'll record live with the rhythm section, you know, over a mock-up of the orchestra.
Yeah.
And then they'll put it all together. You know, it's a whole different. Yeah, you can record anywhere in the world and never leave your living room.
Yeah. It's still better doing it live though with the guys. There's nothing like that, you know.
Yeah, well, that's why at least the rhythm section part will be recorded live.
Right.
I don't think you could really. It would be unusual to just play your part and have the rhythm section play over that, or you play over that.
Right.
Music
Right.
on is one record. There's, you know, there's
Yeah.
something about reacting live to people.
But you're right. Moving to New Mexico, you know, just changed the way I looked at the world and what I wanted to do. And I just figured I could be a soloist, jazz player. I could fly to London and play Mozart or Weber with a symphony. I had enough recognition so I could play in a lot of different places. And I do play classical music, and you know, so it opened up the world instead of closing the world in a sense.
Yeah, isn't that interesting that you could, because there was this concept at a certain time in New York that, you know, if you left New York, that was like going to Australia.
I know, exactly.
It was like, you know, it was,
Yes.
I mean, you know, I went to Canada because the intensity of New York and also the politics of America. Reagan was president, and the fact that I had a teaching offer there, and we were about to have a baby. I thought that, you know, I had good reasons to go. But, you know, Paul Bley told me, he said, well, man, I said, look, I'm only an hour and a half by plane. I could probably get to a studio in New York faster than somebody that is driving in from New Jersey.
Right, that's right.
It doesn't matter. You're not in town. And, you know, it was like people will consider, and I was like, and it turned out to be somewhat true, you know, because
it is basically true. I mean, that's why Phil Ramone could call me one night on a Wednesday night and say, hey, come down to 48th Street and put a solo on a Billy Joel record. Can you do it? And it was like decided that moment. If I lived in Canada it would not have happened.
Yeah, that's or New Mexico.
Right.
Same type of thing. But that leads me to another. You and I have talked about, your involvement with Zen Buddhism, and I'd like to know, how that came about, and just a basic question of how do you think you've grown through the years, and let's say personally and musically. But
Okay, let me go in. I'll go in that order, how that came about. One of the things I was doing when I was in New York was sitting in the Broadway show Mame in the pit. And I was struggling with a lot of emotional stuff. I was in therapy. I was doing a lot of stuff to self-help myself. And there was a woman sitting in the string section looking like a stone that she was meditating. I didn't know what it was. I said, "What are you doing?" Her name was Olga Bloom. She eventually had the barge music under the Brooklyn Bridge, this big barge where she'd have all kinds of music happening. And this was before she did the barge music thing. And she said, "Well, I'm meditating. I'm getting in touch with the cosmic consciousness." And she kind of said, "Do you know what that is?" So that kind of piqued my attention, and she introduced me to her Zen teacher in New York, who happened to be Edo Roshi. And that kind of got me started in having a practice where you go and you sit quietly.
You do the Zazen.
Zazen, exactly.
Zazen, yeah.
Yeah, on 67th Street, off of 3rd Avenue.
Still there?
The Zen Studies Society, I think it was called back then. And so that was the beginning. I haven't stopped doing that. I feel like sitting still will never hurt a person, sitting still by itself, whether you know what you're doing or you don't know what you're doing, just sitting still and say, "I'm just going to sit still," is a very good thing for anyone. And when I read something recently on Facebook that one of the gurus said, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, whoever you are, if you sit quietly twice a day, once in the morning and the evening, just grab a couple of minutes for yourself. So you're just sitting in yourself. You're not going somewhere else. You're going somewhere in, And so it's basically, I've been doing that, and I feel like it's, in terms of growth, I'm still alive. And I still enjoy sitting quietly. And I think it's taken some of the edge off of me.
I think it has. You're a very intense cat. I mean, I remember you, younger. I didn't know you well at that time. We had a couple of conversations. We had, but at one point, I really could see that there was a period you were going through where you seemed troubled. I didn't know what was up, but I said, he's going through some shit.
Yeah, early marriages, early children. My son Josh is now 53.
Wow.
We're on the phone all the time. We're great buddies, but we all have to go through that life's shuffle of people in our lives and how we deal with them. So here I am, a little bit older, not much, just a little bit older.
Yeah, that's
a tiny bit.
And let's take this moment. We wanted to listen to a couple of things of Eddie's music too. So I want to start with this one of the tunes from First Prize. Before that, I was just wondering, did you actually go to Vienna for this contest?
Oh yeah.
How did this record come about? Let me just.
Well, I went to Vienna, as did Randy Brecker, as did Miroslav Vitus, as did a lot of Jiggs Wiggums. A lot of the great young players in Europe and from here went to Vienna to enter this competition.
Like Friedrich Gulda, if people don't know about that, there was a contest. Friedrich Gulda was a classical pianist who also played jazz, and he had a foundation, I guess, that started this contest.
And he was very close with Mel. Mel was a good friend of his, Mel Lewis. And he started this contest, and all the guys who could afford it went there. And I actually won the saxophone, the tenor saxophone prize. Met a lot of people. It was a great experience. But I was in the band at that time. I was in Thad's band. It was the beginning of the Thad Jones. And Mel Lewis was a judge in that competition.
Yeah.
So he had to bow out when it came to voting for me.
Right, I see.
So, and I'll tell you who the judges were: Ron Carter, JJ, Art Farmer, Mel Lewis. Anyway, all great, JJ Johnson,
Yeah.
Cannonball.
Wow.
They were the judges. I had to go out on the stage and play Falling in Love with Love at an up-tempo with those guys sitting in the front row making marks on pieces of paper.
Yeah. Right.
And so I ended up winning that.
Question mark.
Yeah, right. No, so I ended up winning that with Mel, even bowing out and not voting. I still won enough votes to win that prize. And so when I came back to New York, I thought, actually, a record company, Prestige, came after me right away. They had heard that I had won that prize, and they offered me not a contract, a recording session,
That's how that came about. And of course, you used the rhythm section from Thad and Mel's band at the time.
That's right. That's right.
And Hannah and Richard Davis and Mel.
That's right. And Mel, yeah, it was fabulous. People still love that record. I can't believe it's 50 years ago. And, I think, it's.
Yeah. So
I was 40, I'm 80 now, so it's like 40, 50 years ago. I was 25 and I'm 80. So,
right.
Good 55 years ago.
No, 45 years ago.
45, whatever.
Yeah. But who's counting?
Yeah.
But anyway, so let's listen for a minute to this version of actually Falling in Love with Love, which was actually the first. Oh, the first tune, another tune on that record that I really like, that I just wanted before we play it. When you play A Felicidade,
yeah,
tune from Black Orpheus, you do a beautiful thing. You only blow on the da da ba ba da 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 da. You only play on that part over and over, as opposed to playing on the whole tune, which I
play on the whole tune. I play on the beginning part too.
But when you're improvising on it, though, that section is repeated, and I like the way that happened because anyway, that was something I really liked. I mean, you play the song, but then
I'm still looking for a mouthpiece like the one that I played on back then.
I was going to ask you also, just in terms of technique, what was that, a link?
That was a link, WT, metal link, and I have a line on one now. A friend of mine, found one of that vintage for me because it had a certain feel that was just perfect, and it just wore out the gold on it. It didn't play anymore.
Was it around a 7?
No, a WT was like a 5-star.
5-star. So that's sort of like the equivalent of Stan Getz's rubber mouthpiece.
That's right.
5-star, but as a metal.
Yeah, but it had a lot of pop, a lot of pizzazz, and I'm hoping to get one very soon.
That's great. So let's listen to that mouthpiece with Eddie Daniels playing Falling in Love with Love, the song you mentioned. But it's cool. Did you hear about the dyslexic rabbi?
Yo-Yo Ma? Yeah, no.
Yeah, but that's it. He walked around saying yo.
Yeah, yo.
Your clarinet influences, I mean, like Benny or Artie or Buddy DeFranco or my teacher when I started to play clarinet, which didn't last very long. Actually, Tony Scott later became a good friend of mine, but my teacher said, "Do anything, but don't play like Tony Scott." He didn't like all that air or the sound or something. But you know what, clarinet players? I mean, of course, Benny or Artie Shaw. What I think about Benny and Artie, just in my listening to them, because my dad had all the records too. I grew up listening to a lot of those. Well, I listened to more Benny than Artie actually, and I mean, I really appreciated Benny Goodman. I mean, you can't not. But
Yeah.
I found that when I discovered Artie Shaw, there was like another kind of linearness going on to it, less arpeggiated and maybe more like almost like Lester Young with a scalular type of approach. But also the sound, it reminded me of something Stan Getz told me once about sound. And I was wondering how you might react to this. Stan basically, when I asked him about Coltrane, he said he's the best of the players.
Air?
The sound air.
Yeah,
he said there's two sounds you can get out of the horn. He said you can hear it as being or you could hear it as being ooh. He said he himself was an ooh sound.
I like
and
that.
Cool. Of an and when I told Lee Konitz that story, Lee said, what about ah?
What about fe? Oi! Anyway, I'll just answer that. I grew up listening to Benny and Artie when I was 13, 12, 11, 12, 13. But Herbie, as I said, Herbie Bickman, my young cohort who taught me so much, starting to listen to Stan Getz and Train and Charlie Parker, first of all of those guys, started influencing me on the clarinet, thinking of what I'd want to do on the clarinet. And then Buddy DeFranco came along and I had one record of Buddy's. I still have the one record in my studio, the original one called Mr. Clarinet. And, it's a great, great, great record. It just inspired me that I thought, gee, I could do that. I want to play like that, And Art Blakey was on drums. Forgot who the other players were, but very nice record. The sound was spectacular. So that kind of moved me from the Coltrane, Sonny, Stan Getz saxophone thing into the clarinet, hearing somebody doing that on a clarinet. And Buddy became a great friend, a mentor, and a sweetheart of a person. And yeah.
So that's where, because I actually hear that influence in your clarinet playing. Maybe I was going to think more than
a little bit. I don't play the licks that Buddy played. He had his own vocabulary, but the beautiful darkness of his sound is originally what captivated me. That it didn't have to be this E of Benny's.
Well, that's what I mean.
The clarinet, if we're going to call it a clarinet sound, E, I'd say.
Yeah, well, you would say E, and I might say but you're right. A clarinet is more E.
So Stan Getz was ooh. Coltrane, Stan was right?
No, Stan was ooh, according to Stan.
Stan was ooh. What was Coltrane?
Coltrane was
Okay.
Yeah.
And Benny was E, and I was I can't spell it, but I'll say.
I'm from the school.
Yes.
But I think that was what I meant by Buddy, not in the sense of what you played, but I'm just really talking about the quality of sound.
Oh, yeah. Buddy had a beautiful, beautiful sound.
That darkness, and the other thing was like, even in the tenor playing, I think people hear in terms of the colors of dark or light. Like I myself don't think bright on the alto. In fact, when I met Jackie McLean, we did a concert together. And Jackie hadn't heard me before, and he said, "Oh man, you're like me. You're trying to play tenor on alto. You're doing that. You're hearing it as a tenor."
That's cool. I like that.
And he said that's what he thought Bird was doing. That Bird actually had was more of a mentally he was a tenor player. More than, which is true. You hear more Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins in Bird than you might hear of Johnny Hodges and Benny Carter, even though he was well aware of those people.
I hear Bird and Bird.
I hear Bird and Bird too, but if you hear Yardbird Suite, and some of the early things, I think you can. Hear. He's coming a little from Prez.
So what would you give? What would be the sound of Bird's sound? What would it be?
Oh
woo!
My God!
I would say woo,
woo,
woo.
Yeah. I mean. There was Yeah, that was. I bought a Charlie Parker record. I'll tell you a quick story of my life. And I had, been reading about him. There was an article in Show Business Illustrated that somebody had left at our house about bebop, and I was fascinated. I'd already started listening. I'd heard Lester Young. My parents had some records of him. There was even a record with Sonny Stitt on it with Stan Getz and Dizzy from Musicians Only, but I hadn't really heard Bird yet. So I went to Jefferson Department Store in Miami, and I had to order a Charlie Parker record. You couldn't find a Charlie Parker record. In order to find it, you'd have to go down to the ghetto in Liberty City, into the black neighborhood, and I couldn't go there as a little white boy at 13.
Uh-huh.
So it was it was an adventure that I didn't want to take.
Yeah, yeah.
So my record came in, and my dad was working at the Diplomat Hotel in the pit band at that point, playing behind Tony Bennett and Edie Gourmet and Kate Starr.
Wow.
He was like part of the hotel band. So we're there, and I got this Bird record. I got The Genius of Charlie Parker, #5 on Verve, and I started to play it at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and by 10 o'clock at night, I had all Bird solos pretty well down to sing them. And I was singing the bass solos and the drum solo. I mean, singing Max and stuff. I just sang the whole record, almost. So I said, wait till my dad hears this. I did this in one day.
Wow.
I got this. I impressed myself with that. I said, gee, I didn't know I could do that. I hadn't even played the saxophone yet. So
Wow.
I waited for my dad to come home. And he comes home, and one of the only times in my life I ever saw my dad drunk, because he wasn't a drinker really. But I think he was tipsy that night. And he came home, and I'm hiding like in the corner. He doesn't see me. I'm watching him come in, and then I'm going to say, Dad, I got to show you what happened. I got this Bird Charlie Parker record, and I'm about to show him this, but I watch him first. He comes in, and there's a stack of bills on the table, and envelopes, letters, mail. He opens up a bill. He opens up something, and he goes, shit. He's upset. He takes his horn in the soft case and throws it against the couch and starts swearing at his horn, to do this, all this, and he starts talking the fucking plumbers. And I'm going, fucking plumbers. So I creep out of my corner and say, Dad, what's wrong with the plumbers? And he says, well, here's a plumbing bill. For instance, this guy came in, he fixed one little thing. He got this much, $217. He said, that's my week's salary. I just played a night of really good music behind Tony Bennett. And, we got a good band, Vinnie Tano, all these good guys are playing in this big band. And, I'm making this guy came here for 2 hours, and he made what I make in a week. Fucking plumber. You play music, I'll strangle you. So I creeped back to bed and didn't sing it for him. But
it's a good story. That's sweet.
Well, thanks. I eventually did sing it for him.
See, I'm really interviewing you. You're on my podcast.
Yeah, well, I like it to be conversational. I don't want to sit and, monopolize, but sometimes that kind of story. But I just remembered the riveting effect that Charlie Parker had on me.
Oh, absolutely.
But, you remember the first time you heard?
I didn't take off his solos. There was just one lick that I grabbed that made me feel that I knew something of Charlie Parker, and it was doodle-dee-dee-dop.
Doodle-dee-dee-dop.
Just that much. And it taught me major seventh. Doodle-dee-dee-dop. One chord sounds so cool, so interesting. That's the only Charlie Parker solo I ever wrote down or copied or knew. I didn't bother with really wanting to learn all the other stuff. That was like a key little phrase, that got me. On the other hand, you're more intellectual, so you probably swallowed all the solos, and you could probably, remember most of them still.
Well, I have no voice anymore because I had this procedure done. But as a kid, I sang before I played the saxophone. I used to sing for the neighbors, and I'd be sitting there. Chet Baker and I used to laugh about that because he was doing the same thing. I'm sitting there singing songs like, you ain't gonna bother me no more, no how. And I've never even been kissed. And I'm singing all these songs about unhappy love affairs and all these things. But my voice changed, and that's when I started to play the saxophone. But at this point, I didn't play the horn yet, but I sang with everything. I mean, every record, all these Lester Young records, Charlie Parker records. But when it came down to transcribing, I did very little of that. I did the same thing you did. It's very interesting. I would find a phrase, and I'd say, yep, that tells me what that is. And so I transcribed a few solos were so beautiful. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to feel what it would be like to play the whole thing.
You know, what's interesting, I was just thinking about, you know, some of these guys who do imitations of presidents still alive and half not president anymore. And they, you know, very good imitators. And what they do is they find one phrase that either Donald Trump or whoever would say, and they get that one phrase and they get the feel of it from that one phrase, you know, and then they kind of extrapolate on that, but they get that one, there's a, you know, one phrase that Trump or whoever would say that we've all heard so many times, and he nails it. And then he says, oh, I can work with this. So we both stole our little one pieces of things, of bird, of train, and kind of gave us a taste.
Yeah, I think that was, I was afraid of like, and I asked Sonny Rollins about that once too, like how much he actually transcribed, so to speak, you know. And he said no, that he'd done the same thing, that he learned a lot of the heads. And the heads would tell you a lot about what that music was about. Yeah. You know, you learn confirmation, and there's a real music lesson there.
That's right. You know, that's it. Yeah.
You know, you get it from that. And then when he liked certain phrases, he'd learn that and maybe take it through the keys and do stuff like that. But as far as like again, jazz education ruins cats because they tell you, yes, learn this solo and learn it all the way through and learn to play it. Don't sing it. You don't have to sing it. You just read it. And then you know, so.
And then go out and try to find a job after doing all of that.
Right. Good luck. You know, well, it's hard to find a job no matter what you do these days because it's such a different world as far as playing, you know.
But you know, like having a lot of the really good jazz schools or universities that are grinding out some very good players. It's like, where are they going to go? Are they there in your apartment? It looks like you're looking for them. No.
No, I'm just, I was looking for actually a piece of this.
Oh, good. Okay.
Cover my coffee. But, yeah, so you didn't do a lot of transcribing, right? You just got the feeling.
I just had the thought of a phrase. If you could just get me 10,820 votes, which is one more than I have. And I never did this imitation, but I just imagine him. So that's like finding a phrase.
Right.
We've heard that thing on, if you could just get, that's all, you know, just
you got the wine. You got the wine.
He's got the wine, right?
So you got the spirit of the phrase was there. Yeah, and
that's the only time I've ever done an imitation in public.
Now you've done that, and it was, you know, I could tell right away, you know, that
there's hope here.
There's hope that, you know, you may have another career and stand up.
But the hardest part would be to learn some of your own solos.
Well, you know, I had that happen to me, which was very difficult. I'm not a great sight reader. I mean, I'm adequate. You know, but I mean, I really couldn't sight read the circus. But in Lausanne, Switzerland, they called me to play with the big band of Lausanne, a concert, and they told me that they had taken a solo I'd played with Chet Baker on a tune called Beatrice, Sam Rivers tune, and orchestrated it for the saxophone section. Oh, I was honored, you know. Wow, man, it's amazing somebody would do that. So I went to Lausanne, and they stick the music in front of me. It's my solo. I said, man, when's this concert? They said, tomorrow night. I said, there is no way in the world. I am going to learn. I am not Eddie Daniels. You know, you're one of those guys. You can put anything in front of you. That's one thing, too.
Yeah, but it is a hard thing when you see something that you played written out. It's sometimes easier to just improvise it in your own dialect, the way you play, or in your own
right. Well, that's what I said.
When you see it written out with the rhythm micromanaging the rhythm exactly, and so it is hard. That's why I kind of brought it up. I know all of us struggle with seeing our own solos, unless it's a ballad. A ballad I could take care of. Oh, take your time. Take your time.
Yeah, well, I can. Yeah, I mean, I really never worked on. I've been trying to avoid anything I played. You know what I mean? That's what I think. If I
That would
played
be
it,
like me saying I'm getting on my nerves.
I'm getting on my nerves, which I think is something. I mean, I know I get on my nerves a
I
lot.
do too.
You
That was a
know,
Wally Kane line. Wally, did you know
yeah.
Wally Kane?
I met him in the repair shop. I would see him.
Yeah, that was one of his lines. I'm getting on my nerves.
Getting on my nerves. Yeah, that's something that we tend to do. Um, so the other thing is, uh, who I know I was talking a little earlier about Bob Brookmeyer, and I just wanted to mention him for a minute because I never got to know him, and he was kind of a mysterious cat to me. And I guess you had experiences on the band with
Well,
him.
very warm. It was for me, just I didn't have experiences off of the playing field with him. It's not someone I hung out with, but being with him every Monday night at the Vanguard, and he was sitting right in back of me in the trombone section, a seat or two over playing, and very warm. And when I play a solo that he liked, he'd say, "Yeah, pops. Yeah, nice sound, beautiful." He was always said nice things. If I play, if something I did touched him, which was nice. Great. And he was just beautiful player.
So I'm wondering, outside of music, have you any things you like, any hobbies? I once asked Hank Jones, somebody mentioned Thad was a great pool player. And, I asked Hank, I said, I heard your brother, Thad is really, really quite a pool player. You have any hobbies? He said, no, I have no time for hobbies.
Well, life is a hobby. I mean, when we find out what we're really here for, then we know. But life, figuring it out, working through it, working through your own emotions. I love meditating. I also practice a lot. I'm into the news and watching the politics going on, but it feels good at what age I am now, which is only 33. I can just hang out and. You didn't laugh at that line. I thought you would. I said it might.
Yes, I heard 33, yes.
Kind of just enjoying having a little more freedom that I don't have to run and do a gig every night. And when I do have a gig, I take it seriously and I take life seriously and I practice every day. I love practicing. Practicing to me is a meditation.
Yeah, I understand.
You don't need a gig in order to practice a lot,
Yeah, that's the.
For me, it's a pleasure. Maybe that's one of the reasons that I got pretty good at it, is that I like to practice. And a lot of people don't enjoy that. And I'm not saying practicing jazz. I don't particularly practice jazz. I'll play the piano and play some tunes and learn the harmonies and work on some classical etudes on the clarinet or on the flute. I practice the flute too. And now the tenor is getting me excited again.
That's good. I miss your tenor play.
Well, I'm doing it again because Lawrence is putting a gun to my head and saying, "You better start playing the tenor again."
I'll put it to the other side.
Well, but it's just like so many good players. I'm one of a handful of you think of Brecker and Joe Henderson and Stan and Train and all of those guys. None of them could play the clarinet, so that's why I decided.
Yeah, well, I can see that, but then it's a lineage thing. But also, Moody put it to me once. Moody said, I may not be an innovator, I may not be a lot of things, but I know one thing: I play Moody better than anyone in the world.
That's great. Well, I'm starting to get into it. I'm starting to enjoy the sound again of the tenor and playing around with some different mouthpieces. Aaron Drake makes some mouthpieces for me, and he's a terrific mouthpiece maker.
I've heard of his mouthpieces. Yeah.
And I'm, currently looking at some of the old links for that old sound on First Price which is a kind of fun to play around with.
Yeah.
Kind
I
of
have
getting that
Ted
old.
Klum who made this Yardbird, partially with me in mind for it too. And
Who is it?
Ted Klum.
Oh, Ted Klum. Okay.
Yeah, Ted was a student of mine when he went to Berkeley. I took 3 semesters and taught at Berkeley. And then Chet Baker called me and he said, "You're teaching at Berkeley." I was 29 years old. He said, "Aren't you a little young to be out to pasture?" And so he said, "Come to Europe with me." I got 6 weeks in Europe. And then that was the end of my Berkeley
Good for you.
teaching.
Yeah.
But I did do a year and a half of teaching at Berkeley. And Ted was one of my prized pupils. In fact, he took every class I taught. He said when he he took a class with me, he went to the office and he said, "I want to be in every class that this cat's teaching." And now you're a wonderful teacher, and there are things of Eddie available on the internet, on YouTube and everything, where Eddie talks about various concepts. One I like a lot is his idea of playing slowly, which is like he compares to driving your car, parking your car in your garage and backing into it.
You're going 100 miles an hour into your garage.
Yeah.
But once you've lived in that house for years and years and years, you could do it blindfolded. So that's what repetition kind of does for you. You've gone in and out of your garage, snowing, raining. You know when to make the turn, even if there's another car over, like my wife's car is there, you used to think, "Oh, am I going to hit that car?" No, you've done it so many times. And that's what practice is on any level, repetition.
That's yeah, that's true. And it's also the repetition kind of puts you into that meditative state.
Exactly.
Well, I met a guru. I went actually to a satsang given by Satchitananda at an ashram once with a buddy of mine who was into this thing. He dragged me along for this. And I met the guru, and Satchitananda said to me, "Oh, I hear that you are a very good musician, very good saxophone player. Have you brought your saxophone?" I said, "No, I didn't. I just brought myself." He said, "Oh, that's too bad. We would have enjoyed that." I said, "Can I ask you a question?" He said, "Of course." I said, "Well, when I try to meditate, I'm not a very good meditator. I mean, I try to focus on the mantra and I do this, and my mind still is racing all over the place. I have this very active mind. And, what can I do to be better at meditating?" He said, "Well, do you practice your saxophone?" I said, "Oh, all the time, 6, 7 hours a day sometimes." He said, "Well, you are already meditating."
That's true.
Exactly. Don't worry about the rest. He said, "Try what you can with, conventional meditation." He said, "But you are already in a state that people aspire to, that meditators, aspire to." I hadn't thought of it that way.
I will say one thing about this very thing is that I discovered, having been a meditator for 50 years, aside from music, that after I practice and I'm into it and you're very focused and I practice for a half an hour, let's say, and then it feels good. So I put the instrument down. And then sometimes the first instinct is, I think I'll go to the fridge and get a glass of something, I'll eat something. And then I now say to myself, sit down and be still for a second. And I realize that after playing and having had that kind of, that Satchitananda said, that focus when you're practicing, and you don't run off to grab the phone or talk to someone or distract yourself, and you just sit still for a minute. Something magical happens to me every time I do that. And so I recommend, and you don't have to practice great, you don't have to be great, you don't have to be anything. Just do it. Just practice wholeheartedly for as long as you like, and then say, "Okay, I've had enough. Now sit down." Even if you were sitting, put your horn down and just sit still there for a while and say, "What's going on in my head after I've done all of this practicing that felt so good?" And it's really magical for me.
That's interesting. Who told me that too? When I was young, I met Stan Getz, and I was talking to him, and he talked to me about quite a few things. And one thing he said was, in practicing, he said, "Don't just keep the horn in your mouth." He said, "Take some time when you're practicing and just sit there for a minute and let your thoughts collect, and then pick the horn up again." He said, if you're practicing 8 hours a day and the horn's in your mouth all the time, you won't be as successful as if you take breaks. Take a break
It's
and
good.
continue.
But for me, when I say that, I get still. I'm not having thoughts going around in my head, kind of back to what you said to the guru. I can't get quiet. And he said, you practice. Okay, so practice and then sit down, see what it feels like. Just close your eyes and hang out in your own head after you've done that kind of practicing without any thought at all. And it's magical. It's quite magical. I hope somebody tries that.
I'll try that. I don't think I've done it quite like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm thinking, where else can we go? I think we've got, playing duets with pianists. Eddie's done a lot of beautiful music with her in a lot of contexts. One of them is duets with the pianist Roger Kellaway. And, I like duets too. For some reason, there's some way you get to something very
free. It's freeing. We just, the two of you can flow in and out. You don't have to worry about the drummer or the bass player. It's just, you can go anywhere at any time. That's how it is when I play with Roger.
Yeah, I've got a few cats that I've had that experience with, that's been wonderful. The one thing we wanted to play was, I'm looking at my list of questions for you. I've actually covered just about everything that I had to say, except we were going to play something of you with Gordon Goodwin's Big Fat Band. I was called, right? PAT.
The Under the Wire.
Under the Wire, and there's a live version that goes on for a while that's like absolutely incredible, But there's one on the record that's also wonderful.
Well, the record one is more interesting because I didn't have any preparation. He sent me the part. I went into a studio and overdubbed that solo, which ended up being pretty good the first time. And so I like that. I didn't have the stress of a live performance. And the live one was just done, last June. So the recorded one, I think, is better. I like it better. And I'm younger on it, so what the hell.
Well, that's a question too, the idea of aging. And, like we talked about how you changed as a person through the years, I find that even with my affliction, I can't play, like I tell people, I can't play 15 choruses of Cherokee anymore. And maybe I never should have in the first place. But, there are ways, certain economical things. I think things that my playing has improved in some aspects. How do you feel? Like, where have you,
Well, I think as you get older, I'm having a little bit of a problem with my thumb and holding the clarinet, because I've come back and I'm practicing a lot and I have a little bit of pain in my thumb, and I have different devices for the thumb. And I was just at a Rolfing session with my doctor, and you might be able to see that line on my thumb that he drew from the nail. Let's see, you can see that to where the energy goes in the wrist. So here I'm a guy, I'm, an alta cocker,
right.
and I'm still trying to figure out how to navigate being in this body and having it work like it did when I was 25, which it doesn't, but it's pretty good. I will accept it. It's pretty good, and it gives me something to work on.
Well, that's beautiful, and you still sound great. And, I know that you've been traveling sometimes, and you can still do that.
A little bit.
I think we've covered just about everything that I cover with you.
And I'm around. You can call me anytime,
I will. I've got a lot of, I still got things to, I thought we've had some nice talks, and it's been really nice to get some insights into what makes Eddie Daniels, and the wonderful musician and person that you have become and were and are. And I wanted to mention that this is called "On the Real Side" is the name, which is our theme song. You'll hear is a tune Walter Davis Jr. wrote called "On the Real Side," which is a nice tune. And we want to tell people they can watch this podcast episode on our YouTube channel, which is at Bob Mover Jazzability. And you can find us on social media at Bob Mover Jazzability. And do check out our website and upcoming master classes. Once a month, I give a master class online, and you can go to www.bobmoverjazzability.com, and you can become a member or just take an individual class, whatever you feel like doing. And that's my little commercial. I want to thank you for this wonderful
My pleasure.
we've had, and wish you all the best. And I'll talk to you soon. Anyway.
Absolutely.
All right.
All right. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.